Everybody's got a story. You just have to listen. Oh, I'm Joe Pardavila, and this is Good Listen. And Jerry Seinfeld does this great bit about the most people's number one fear is public speaking, and number two is death. And he thought, well, isn't that funny that means that most people who go to a funeral would rather be in the casket than give the eulogy. And what's also funny is that a lot of people actually love public speaking. I mean, they want to do it for a living, but it's not very easy. So today I've got Keith L. Brown, who's an incredible public speaker who actually gives speeches all over the world and helps people become public speakers. So I figured I'd get him on, talk to him about how he did it, what's his story, and how he helps people become public speakers. Keith, welcome to Good Listen. How are you?
Listen, I'm empowered, not devoured. I'm glad to be here. Where it's good listen, good vibes, good motivation, good elevation, good inspiration, and I'm here for some celebration. Absolutely.
I love it. I love all those IONs. Yes, let's do it.
Yes.
So I want to start by talking about childhood. And I know on this show, I kind of go talk about people's origin stories, but I don't go way back to childhood. But I think it's important for you because, earlier this season, I had a therapist who works with high-performing individuals. And we talked about, what makes a person. And she said to me plainly that, hey, listen, a lot of who we are is shaped in our childhood. And I feel that can be said about you as well. Like this idea that from what I understand, you sounded like a bit of a pain in the ass, Keith. Yes,
Yeah.
you talk a lot, very high energy, and then obviously you developed and refined it as an adult. But take us back to how that young Keith L. Brown developed into this adult Keith L. Brown, because I think we all still have a piece of our childhood inside of us till the day we die.
Absolutely. Well, my childhood is the foundation of what I and who I am, and what I do. Early on, I was labeled special ed or special needs today. I was labeled special ed. Quite frankly, like you said, they said two things. Well, three things. I talked too much, I was too hyper, and I wanted to give all the answers. Let me say that again. I talked too much, I was too hyper, and I wanted to give all the answers. Now, ironically, those are the same traits that get me booked around the world as an internationally acclaimed speaker. I still talk too much. I still have answers, right? And I'm still hyper. And that's how I'm able to connect with my audiences. But Joe, early on, it was rough. It was tough because I would be in a class of 35, and then they would come and put me in a class of 5. And at that point, I knew that I was small and black and different. I knew that I was small and black and different. And it was ironic as well because here I was in a smaller setting, but I still connected with the larger school setting. I was always talking. Whatever it was, I was talking. I can remember in 5th grade, Miss Finkelstein, PS 52 in Queens, New York. All right, shout out to Queens, New York. And Miss Finkelstein made me Bob Barker. And so what would happen is every morning I would be in her classroom helping her get set up. And she would say, Keith, it's time. And I would go into the halls, man. I would go into the halls and my fellow students would be coming in and I would be like, come on down. And that's what Bob Barker used to do when they would win. And so Finkelstein was one of those early educators who poured life into me. So I want to give a shout out to all of our educators and all of our education support personnel that pours their hearts and nurturing into young people and children on a daily basis. So that was the foundation, the beginning of Keith L. Brown, Mr. Impossible, from special ed to specialty speaker, from at risk to taking risks.
Love it. Love it. And so, and I think that's where sort of like the rubber meets the road in terms of the foundation we build. So we all have little things. So for me growing up, Keith, I was, my hero was David Letterman. And I was like, I want to be in show business.
Yes.
I was a kid of immigrant immigrant people. My mom was from Cuba. My dad was from Spain. We didn't have any connections. So I kind of just kind of put pedal to the metal, internet radio stations, got a job, and the rest is history. So that was in me from the start. So now for you, we know it was at the start with you. How do you develop that into a career? Because at the end of the day, we get to make this celebration, we got to pay. So we got to pay the rent, we got to pay for food. So how did you connect your gifts to make it into a career?
Well, I have to credit my parents for that. I grew up in a blended family. I think that's important to mention that. I like to say I grew up with two mothers, two fathers, brothers and sisters on both sides, because my biological parents did not stay together. So my mom married a wonderful man who became what the society calls my stepfather, but I call him my bonus father. And if he must be called my stepdad, it's because he stepped in and he helped save my life. Okay. So mom an educator, dad worked for the transit authority. And then my second set of parents, my biological dad, college professor, my bonus mom was a teacher. And I would say that my parents, when I was growing up in New York, I was involved in the Black Spectrum Theater Company. I was involved in the Negro Ensemble. I was actually on WLIB, WBLS when I was growing up. I was in school plays. I was on the debate team. So here's the key. They nurtured all of those gifts, all of the gifts that the world sees now. It was nurtured. It was nurtured by my parents. I played sports too, but even when I played sports, I was more of a hype man. I was more of a talker then. So even then, I was talking. So fast forward to going to college at the Savannah State University. Shout out to all HBCUs. Savannah State University in Savannah, Georgia. I was on the debate team there. I was on the Players by the Sea Theater Club. I became the SGA president. All of those required what? The power of communication. Fast forward to graduate school. Here I am in graduate school. English. I had to talk there. Graduate assistant. I had to teach and talk there. Fast forward to then going into the classroom, teaching high school in Middle Georgia, teaching high school, East Lawrence High School. There I was a drama director and an English teacher. And in 2000, Joe, it all came full circle because I stepped out on faith, man. I stepped out on faith. I left one school to teach and educate and elevate in the global school of life. And so I went from special ed to being in organizations that enhance my speaking ability to moving on to teaching and speaking, and then ultimately doing what I do now as a professional speaker, coach, and trainer who travels all over the world. So understand the key was talking. It was talking. It was talking. And so that led me to doing what I do now, earning an income to help everyone have a better outcome. Let me say that again. I earn an income to help the world have a better outcome.
Love it. Love it. And it's so funny. I want to pull on the thread about speakers because in my day job, Keith, I consult entrepreneurs how to create content, audio, video. And what they all want, Keith, and you know this, and I'm sure your inbox is inundated. How do I become a speaker? How do I do this? And so, what's amazing about your story is that you laid the groundwork to become a speaker. But, Keith, as you know, people don't like laying that groundwork. That's a lot of work to lay the groundwork. And so it's so with there's obviously like third parties, people like the people I work with help people kind of like circumvent things and cut the groundwork in time. But it's a hustle. So take me back to those early days when you get on the speaker circuit, because one thing I always remind people when it comes to being a speaker, those first few and those first few hundred maybe are probably free. So take us back to those
Absolutely.
early beginnings of what it was like for you.
Well, what you have to understand is that I was making a certain income when I was teaching. I was on track to be a school administrator. And so imagine stepping out on faith, leaving that income behind. And I can remember my grandmother saying, listen, what are you going to do? What direction are you going in? I said, well, listen, I know the director and that is God. So I'm good. She said, well, what about your benefits? I said, I know the benefactor. So all of this played into the fact that in the beginning, I went from this wonderful income and what they call a secure position to having nothing. I literally stepped out on faith with nothing except the little bit I had in my teacher's retirement. And so you can imagine the first year pretty much was filled with nothing but free engagements. All of the schools that we competed against in sports, those are the schools I went back to. And I begged those principals and those superintendents to let me in, and they did. But here was the caveat. I had to speak for free. I was speaking at conferences for free. I was actually, and you know this, I was actually flying around the country for free to speak at conferences for free, lodging,
Yeah.
airfare. All of this was coming out of my pocket just so I could get on the mic and tell my story, just so I could get on the mic and tell my why. And so, yes, those first couple of years, they were lean. It was about me putting more income out than getting income in. And anyone who's an emerging speaker or seeks to be one, you're not going to do what Joe does. You're not going to make six figures on your first speech. You're not going to make six figures a month or six figures a year. No, you might put out six figures in a year. So, like you said, it's a hustle. But here's my question: how hungry are you?
Yeah.
Is this really your passion or is this just a hobby? Because if it's just a hobby, that's not what you want to focus on. Because I love bowling. That's a hobby of mine. I love to bowl, Joe. But when it comes to speaking, that was my purpose and that was my passion. So I would advise everyone, be prepared. Be prepared to invest in yourself. Be prepared to get a coach like myself or a coach like Joe or our colleagues. Be prepared because there's no way you're going to start out in this industry today and do what Joe and I do on stage. That's not believable. It's not realistic. And anybody who tells you that otherwise, you need to run quickly.
And it's funny, Keith, a lot of people always say, "Oh, the younger generation, the kids, they want results quick. They want easy payouts." And it's funny,
Yes.
every generation is like this because I
Every generation.
in their 40s, 50s, 60s who want to be speakers, they're like, I gotta work for free for a year? I can't do that. Can we Is there an easier way to do it? And so we all want that instant gratification. And on the speaker circuit, it's very, very difficult to maintain it to the point where you are making a living. And there's, as you know, Keith, from being on an extensive circuit, there a lot of those people fit on like two hands. Like there's not many people that can make a pretty good living. So let's go back to if you can remember, your first like legitimate paid speaker appearance, like the one that they signed it. You got a nice big fat check at the end of it. What do you remember about it? And what did that mean to actually then finally, like you said, after money going out for so long, money
Yes.
finally coming in?
Well, it was so awesome because my first legitimately paid gig was with the Sickle Cell Foundation of Georgia. And the director, D. Jean Brannon, she gave me a shot. And that's all I needed was an opportunity. She said, listen, we have this camp coming up in the state of Georgia. I love your energy. I love your passion. I want you to speak at this camp. It's going to be a 3 or 4 day camp. I only have $1,000. She had no idea I was excited about that. Okay, just excited. Listen, I didn't want it to show on my face. I want to have because she really didn't know what I charged, but she said it's 3 4 days, and all we have is $1,000. On the inside, I'm like GOODJOB. Good job, good job, Joe. I'm hyped about it. But listen, that one camp, and here's the thing, potential speakers, prospective speakers, that one camp with the Sickle Cell Foundation of Georgia, 4 days, inspiring thousands of young people and counselors. Something else was very special about that camp, Joe. Yes, I inspired and I empowered, but there were corporate sponsors at that camp, and they heard me as well, and they started to book me as well. And so I always tell my clients, don't be concerned with the number of people in the audience. Be concerned with who's in the audience. Because you could speak to 1,000 people, but they can't get you booked. You can speak to 10 superintendents who can bring you to their school districts. So that was my first legitimate speech. And then, Joe, it happened. It happened. I was booked by the Georgia School Nutrition Association. Joe, it was awesome. But the thing was, I didn't do my research. I was so hyped about the speech, I didn't ask about the demographics of the audience. So I always come out to music. So, Joe, the curtains opened, and there were about 500 people there, and half the audience were elderly people.
Oh
But I
no.
love my senior citizens. But I did not connect on that day because I came out to the song, a rap song called Shake It Fast by Mystical, and they looked at me as if I were from outer space. Needless to say, I bombed. I bombed on that day, not because of my content, but by the song that I chose, and I did not know my audience. And so that's another lesson for all prospective speakers. You got to know your audience. You have to know the demographics. You have to connect with your audience before the speech. That's so very important. And so I would say the Sickle Cell Foundation of Georgia, as well as that school nutrition speech, it taught me something. It taught me about the power of research, the power of connection, the power of engagement. And so from then on, it's been all the way up.
Oh, that's so great. Great story. Thank you for sharing that. And I've actually had to voice Dan Kennedy's book, so I'm sure you're familiar with Dan Kennedy. It's very familiar. And so one of the books I read about is like like speak to sell. And so his idea behind speaking engagements is you have a speaking engagement because at the end of it, there's a hook that you're selling something, whether a program or a book. When did that become part of how you were able to implement your income? Because one, yeah, those speaking engagements, they pay and they pay well. But two, that's finite. Like you need to try to come back money more, on a subscriber basis, what have you. So when did you introduce the idea of selling programs and books to your speeches?
Yeah, well, I started out in the year 2000, 2001, and I was very fortunate in 2002 to connect with the great Les Brown and become a part of the Les Brown Speakers Network, where I was a speaker with Les Brown on tour for years. But it was in 2002 that he said, Keith, you need a book. Joe, you just said it. After the speech, what now? The audience is clapping, but they want to take you home with them. And you must have a product. And so that product became a book called Chitlins. Now, I'm not talking about the good Southern cuisine, okay? I'm talking about, it was an acronym: creative, helpful, intuitive thoughts, lifting individuals naturally seeking. Let me say that again: creative, helpful, intuitive thoughts, lifting individuals naturally seeking. And it was a family empowerment book. And what happened is, when I finished speaking, individuals would then come to the back of the room and they would purchase that book. And then school districts started purchasing that book for families years later. And so then I learned the power of products. So I wrote another book, Conversations on Success, with my good friend, John Christensen, right? Okay, Joe Calloway and others, okay? And here we are. Here we are, Chicken Soup for the Soul. We worked with them, Conversations on Success. And then I just wrote more books and curriculums. And today, it's a part of my negotiating. It's a part now of my speaking platform. My speaking profile is that, listen, if you can't afford my fee, you can purchase my fee in books. You can purchase the fee in the programs. And so you're right. You can't just have the microphone and speak and leave. You have to have products. There's power in products. If they can't afford your fee, they can definitely purchase products. If they can't afford your fee, you have coaching programs. So we have all of that. So you're absolutely right. That happened in my second year of speaking, learning the power of products.
Nice, fast learner. And a lot of your speeches and the work you do is family based. And you mentioned earlier the fact that you came from a blended family, and there are so many think pieces and people talking about, the idea behind families and minorities, especially that are struggling financially. And the fact that, single parents, and it sets people back. And I will tell you, like I said, a kid of immigrants, if I didn't have my family's work ethic, both my mother and father, there's not a chance in hell I'd be here. Like, not a chance in hell. And so, I often joke that I'm sort of, my joke is, I'm a blue collar guy in a white collar world. I have this work mentality in doing what I do. So tell me about how important that family dynamic was, and as a result, like why you're here because of that. Because I think the thing is, we could always sliding doors in and be like, what if this happened? Like, if your mom didn't remarry, what would have happened? There's so much could have gone wrong in your life, could have gone right too. But you see the data about what happens in single parent households. So talk about the family dynamic.
Well, the family dynamic was loving, it was supportive, but we also had issues because when you come from a blended family, you understand that that's not the biological foundation. And of course, the nuclear family, the what they call the standard family, biological family, whatever you want to call it, they have issues too. So now you're coming into a space where you're meeting siblings for the first time. Okay. and you're merging families, right? And there's a dynamic there, and there's a dynamic of loneliness, wondering why your parents didn't stay together, wondering why this parent might not have wanted you or that parent did. So you have those dynamics as well, even in the family. So there are a lot of dynamics even in that family. And I think that's why I was so talkative. I think that's why I was so talkative. But not only the family that I lived with, the extended family, my grandparents, aunts, and uncles. I spent my summers in Savannah, Georgia. And so my extended family was nurturing, my extended family was loving. And so that played a role in who I was because everyone nurtured the speaker in me. I was doing Easter speeches. You hear me, Joe? I'm talking about I had to stand up in front of hundreds of people when I was 5, 6, and 7 years old doing Easter speeches. I had family members that encouraged me to be in speak out contests when I was in special ed. Here in public schools in New York, I remember winning a spelling bee when I was in special ed. I actually won a district wide spelling bee. I still have the paperwork. I actually won a speak out contest while in special ed. I actually did Martin Luther King Jr. speeches every single year. I did the Gettysburg Address,
Wow.
standing up, doing these things all while being labeled special ed. But my family always knew something. They nurtured the gift in me. And so I always tell parents, no matter what your family dynamic is, nurture the gift in your child. If your child is talkative, don't shut that child up. That child might be a congressman one day, might be a great orator one day, a great pastor, a faith-based leader, a CEO, a podcaster like a world acclaimed podcaster like Joe. So, if you got that, your son is beating or your daughter is beating on the table, that might be a world-class drummer. And so what you have to do is hone those gifts, bring those gifts out in your child. So I always tell parents that, and if I may, since we're talking about parenting, I have a program called Fathers Not Father. Fathers Not Father. FATHERS, not FARTHER. And I talk about 4 principles to dads across the world. We must reflect our children. We must protect our children. We must respect our children and never neglect our children. Those are the 4 pillars, the 4 principles. And so I go in school districts across the country, working with dads on not just showing up for athletic events, but showing up for the PTA meetings, not just showing up for athletic events, but showing up for the curriculum night. And I work with dads in Head Start, and I work with dads in school district, and I work with dads who are no longer married to their child's mom. And I say, you and your wife got a divorce, but you can't divorce your children. And so that's a connection. And so family is so very vital to me. It's so very important. And that's why I work with fathers. I work with a lot of single mothers. And when I meet them, Joe, this is the first thing I say. Your child did not come from a fatherless home. Your child came from a mother more home. I want to start right there. Not fatherless, but mother more. Because and I know as a parent, there are times when, we drop the ball. But I always want to encourage those parents that we can get back up and that we can nurture our children and that many times we're doing the best that I can. Joe, I've been to thousands of schools in the last 20 years that I've been doing this, and I've never met a parent that didn't want their child to succeed. Many times they just didn't have the tools. And so that's what I do. I give those parents the tools. I give those parents the uplift, the education, the motivation, the inspiration. And then at the end of the day, hopefully they do the implementation. Okay, let me say that. And that goes to all of you prospective speakers out there. Joe and Keith, we can give you the motivation, the inspiration, the transformation, but if you're not willing to do the implementation, if you're not willing to implement and do the work, your life won't change. If you're not willing to implement and do the work, then your income will not rise. Your impact, your influence, and your income will stay the same if you're not willing to do the implementation. So I know I said a lot there, but yes, the family dynamic is very important. And that's why I am a fatherhood coach and I am a parent and family engagement coach as well. So family is very important. And I do that in school districts across the world.
All right. So, Keith, I don't have children, never really wanted kids. I think I was always too career driven. Me and my wife both were. And A lot of my friends have kids, and I have conversations with them about, in terms of where we are in time now, how much harder it is to be a parent. And obviously, technology plays a role, culture. There's a big soup of issues that make parenting hard. What do you think, since you talk to parents all the time, what is the number one problem nowadays for, prospective parent, maybe young parent? Like, what's the number one problem that you see that they have the most trouble struggling with?
Connection. One word, connection. I'm seeing a disconnect between parents and children in terms of communication, in terms of parents engaging with children like they're human beings. Because I want to take you back. One of the things that I heard growing up from parents, adults, period, was don't do as I do as I say. Okay. Don't do as I do as I say. And I learned early on with my son, out of fear, he would do as I say, but out of my example, he would do as I do. And so, one of my first lessons to parents is don't tell your child, don't do as I say, because they're going to follow your example. I think that's very important. I always tell parents this, because no one ever apologized to me. There were times when I was disciplined wrongly, incorrectly. Joe, parents didn't apologize back in the day. Grandparents didn't apologize. And so adults ask me now, why did you apologize to Keon? That's my son. Why did you apologize to him when he was growing up? I said, I apologized to my son when I was wrong because I wanted to teach him that he deserves respect in life. I wanted to teach him that he is a human being and human beings deserve respect. They deserve love and empathy. And so while there was structure in our home and there was discipline, we treated our son like he was a human being. And a lot of times parents back in the day didn't have the tools, but there are tools today. So I teach parents that communicate with your children, listen to your children, but definitely have structure. I will say this. My son is almost 30 years old, very productive. He works with underrepresented youth in a federal TRIO program, and he helps, underrepresented youth get into college. So he's doing a great work, a great job. But he and I have never become friends, never. Uh, nah, we're not friends. I'm your dad. I can be friendly, but I'm your dad. So I teach parents now when your child is in elementary school and they're 8 years old, okay, you can't be their friend because they have not developed yet. They're not on your level. So we don't need to be their friend. We need to be their parent. I tell single moms this because I run into single moms from all cultural backgrounds, and they might have a 10-year-old son, and they tell their 10-year-old son, you're the man of the house. I say, please don't tell him that. He can't be the man of the house. It's not, number one, it's not physically possible, but it's not mentally possible. It's not emotionally possible. He hasn't even developed. So instead of saying you're the man of the house, let him be a young man who's growing, okay? And then get him some positive male role models, but he can't be the man of the house. So things like that I try to redirect parents without offending them, okay? But just helping them grow. But I would say to all parents, talk to your children. You said it, social media. I got elementary kids on social media. Parents need to know what's in that child phone. If you're paying for it, you need to know what's in the phone. And 9 times out of 10, they're paying for it. So that's what I would say to parents. Connect, talk, listen, get back to family night. Joe, you remember when we were growing up, man, we had family night.
We have
You
family.
remember?
There was no such thing
Right.
without the family. Yeah.
Absolutely. We ate together. We asked each other about how was your day? How was your day, Keith? How was your day, Joe? And so we have to get back to at least once a week having family night and meals together with no telephones where we communicate. I believe if parents would communicate with their children more, if they would listen more, then children would open up. So I would say the number one disconnect is that lack of connection, that lack of speaking and listening and just having a clear family goal, not just individual goals, but a family goal that we all work towards. And let me say this, positive communication. Don't call your children out their name. All right. The only thing that you should call your child is what's on their birth certificate. I know we get frustrated. I know they can be a pain in the neck. Right? I was a pain in the neck. My son was a pain in the neck. Yes, yes. But at the end of the day, we still nurturing. And Joe, finally, when I'm angry, when I was angry with my son and I was ready to blow my stack, I was ready just to, just lay hands on him, right? And not in a positive way. It wasn't going to be a hug. You know what I did, Joe? Those are the times I went out and I took a walk. Those are the times when I went and played basketball. Those were the times when I knew I had to give myself room to breathe before I come back and address my son. And I thought that was very important. And I think that's important for parents today.
Nice. Well, let's wrap things up by talking about your speaking. And when it comes to speakers, everybody needs a hook, especially when you're starting out. You need to have that hook to attract an audience, to be your calling card. Yours is Mr. I'm Possible. So
Yes.
tell me about Mr. I'm Possible.
Well, Mr. Impossible takes individuals from impossible to it's possible to I'm possible. But when Mr. Impossible hits the stage, Mr. Impossible might hit the stage like this. I love myself. I believe in myself. I'm proud of myself. I'm a genius. I can, I will, I must, and I got this. So when Mr. Impossible hits the stage, Joe, and there are thousands of young people in an auditorium, and there are thousands of teachers in the gymnasium, and they think it's going to be boring, because the first thing I do is I move that podium out the way. The podium is the Indian speaker. And I come out to music, and I get the crowd hyped, and I connect early on. That's who Mr. Impossible is. I tell them my story about being labeled special ed. I tell them my story about losing a brother to sickle cell anemia, losing a sister to the AIDS virus, my wife and I losing 2 children. I tell them the story of my mom having Alzheimer's disease. I'm talking about Mr. Impossible, and everything I just named would lead you to believe that my life has been impossible. But no, resilience caused me to go from impossible to it's possible to I'm possible. And I tell them that that's the ultimate. When you reach the I'm possible, you're taking responsibility and accountability. And so now, Joe, Mr. Impossible has this global saying, we gonna make it anyway. Regardless of what happens, Joe, we gonna make it anyway. And so Mr. Impossible, there's not much difference between Keith and Mr. Impossible. You see, it's not much difference. It's just that Mr. Impossible is a little more polished, a little more seasoned, but he's just as hyped. And I believe every audience wants that enthusiasm. And you know that, Joe, because you have it. And I believe it's been said, when you catch on fire with enthusiasm, people will come for miles to watch you burn. So a lot of times when they see me around the world, they don't say Keith L. Brown. Hey, Uncle Keith. And I love it that way, because that means they're tuned in to the impossibilities of life instead of the impossibilities. Okay. And so that's what it's all about. That's who Mr. Impossible is. And that's what I do. I take individuals from impossible to it's possible to I'm possible. And Joe, bam, that's it right there, man. Talk is expressive.
And Keith, if folks want to find out more about you, your books, book as at any kind of show or anything like that, where should they start?
Well, they should start with my website, which is keithlbrown.com, keithlbrown.com, or you can shoot an email to Adrienne, ADRIENNE, Adrienne at the IPYagency.com, Adrienne at the IPYagency.com. That is my purposeful publicist. Also, my Instagram and TikTok, Keith L. Brown _. You know, we live, all the way live on social media, right? Keith L. Brown _ on TikTok and Instagram, Keith L. Brown 1911 on Twitter and Facebook. And so if you Google Keith L. Brown motivational speaker, you're going to find me. And that's what it's all about. Taking individuals from impossible to it's possible to I'm possible, having the moniker, we gonna make it anyway, teaching the world that talk is expensive. And before we go, Joe, you know, they say actions speak louder than words, right? But it's the words that move people to action. It's the words that move people to action. Talk has never been cheap. Talk is expensive. You talk well, Joe, you get paid well. I talk well, I get paid well to do it. And so that's the key. Talk is expensive. Whatever you do, speak life into individuals, because the outcome is expensive. They may grow to be what they were called to be. But then if you speak negatively in their lives, they may minimize themselves for the rest of their lives and never reach their goals. And that too is expensive. So at the end of the day, talk is expensive.
Love it. Keith L. Brown, thanks so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
Listen, thank you, Joe, and happy 2023, not 2025. Happy 2023. GOODJOB. Good job. Good job.
And that's going to do it for this episode of Good Listen. I hope you enjoyed our time together. If you want to connect with me, go to joepardavila.com. If you're watching this on YouTube, a thumbs up would be amazing. It's a small gesture, but it really helps the channel. If you're listening and watching on Spotify or listening on Apple, a 5-star review would be really, really sweet. Thanks again. I will see you next time. Adios.